Okie dokie. So I am showing you this website, which I think you may find a little confusing right now, but as you get and develop more and more into your career, especially if you're interested in research, and for those of you who have more math background, this will be really super helpful in ensuring that when you're trying to develop causal analysis, that you can actually visualize it and test it. And so what this program does is here we have this sort of causal model, and it tells you um, what the testable implications are. So what the model implies what logic the model implies based off of how you drew it. So you need to define it and you need to draw it. But once you do that, it helps you define what this looks like. And you can use this with R, which is a statistical programming language, to help you ensure that the models that you're statistically developing do or don't uphold these logical models. And so here you see you can export the R code. And now this is all super complex, but I think it can also be helpful for you when you're developing research questions and for you to just have a resource to know that this exists. And so it also at the bottom here tells you how many exposures, outcome, covariates, and causal paths there are. So the exposure is what we understand as the independent variable. So it's the intervention or the thing that is being the actor onto some outcome, which is the dependent variable. And so you can label those in your model. This is just some model that I had already loaded up here. And you can build a new model as well. And so before I get into building a new model, the testable implications here. So this relays that A and B have no relation to each other. And A and D and D have a relationship to each other, but only through E. And then B and E have no relationship to each other. And so this sort of helps you when you're thinking about more complex models and figuring out what you need to test. So these things need to be tested in your statistical model, and you can go through and make sure that you're working within a logical construction of all of the different points rather than just sort of throwing things into a statistical model without mapping it first. And so I'm going to develop a new model and make it much simpler than what we just saw. So let's say that we're going to look at the relationship between education and wages, which is pretty common for social scientists to look into, right? And so I just click on the space and it allows me to name a new variable. So I put educational learning on wages. And so I'm looking on how education influences wages. So that's the causal pathway, that one. And then I'm going to label this education as the exposure because it's what is causing the wages. That's what we're trying to analyze, it causing the wages, which is going to be the outcome. And so there's no independence between these things. They're connected, clearly. So there is no testable implications that show up here because if you test for this, then you're getting most of the model. But oftentimes we'll find in statistics that that's not enough, right? Because we're just doing the relationship between these two if we're doing a linear regression, but there might be some unknown And we don't know what this is. It could be, for example, if we're thinking about education and wages, something that would influence both of them might be parents' education, right? Parents' education might influence how much they make, therefore how much inherited wealth you have, and like how the types of jobs you're exposed to. And it might also influence your education too, because we know that those are correlated as well. And so I'm going to show the unknown here is influencing education, and it's also influencing wages. So what this is called here, this type of variable, is a confounding variable. It confounds these two together in a sense. If we look at the definition of confound, it says that it's a mix of something else that the individual elements become difficult to distinguish. So if we remember that, then not knowing this makes understanding this sort of difficult, because this is also in there as well, the unknown. And statistical definitions of it is a variable that influences both the dependent and independent variable, causing a spurious association. So this relationship right here might not be accurate, because this unknown is the thing that's actually influencing them. It's what's causing the relationship to occur. Randomization, which we talked about in our quasi-mental methods, helps ensure that this relationship right here doesn't exist. Because what we do when we randomize that is that we are sort of getting our temporal order in advance and ensuring that the unknown won't influence education, because we're sort of can ensure that the temporal order of it is that our unknown comes after education if we do a randomization of experiments. And so we see here that education and the unknown are independent. And therefore we can estimate the effect between education and wages without any bias. So that's what randomization does, is it ensures that confounders are in a certain temporal order, and that we're only showing the confounders based off of the wages. Because what you're doing when you're randomizing things is you're having two samples that are supposed to be similar in every way possible that you can think of. So this would not be influencing education then. And we can also do this by conditioning in statistical methods. So we can condition we can control for the unknown. That way we're only getting this relationship. And so we want to make sure that we understand the backness, the sort of the backdoor causal patterns that might influence the causal pattern we're interested in. So when we had a relationship here, this right here is a backdoor pattern that's sort of creating doors for spurious effects to develop. But when we get rid of this, not that, then we're sort of closing those back doors. And we not only make sure that we close the back doors that can cause relationships to exist that are the relationships we're not interested in, but we also want to make sure to leave this pathway open. Okay, so I'm going to change the education to just a regular X and a regular Y. Okay, so let's say there's some unknown called Z. And we don't know if there's a relationship between X and Y. This is what is called a fork. So we know that X and Y are independent conditional on Z, or this unknown right here. Okay, so let's say instead that this unknown, I'll rename it Z so we can keep some consistency. Let's say that this unknown, actually the relationship between X and Z looks the opposite. So it's not this way, it's actually this way. And Z is in the middle of X and Y. Then we know that X and Y are independent conditional on Z. So there's a causal pathway from X to Y through Z. And so what you can do is control then for Z to understand the relationship between X and Y. And what this is called is a pipe. So there's actually a term for this causal pathway, and that term is called a pipe. The previous one was a fork, remember? And so another way that an unknown or confounder can show up is that it could actually be that there's no causal pathway between X and Y, but they both influence Z. So X and Y are independent. They are not related to each other in any way. There's no causal pathway. So if we developed a model that was trying to understand this causal pathway, that wouldn't make much sense. And what this is called is a collider. So these two variables are colliding into Z. But maybe there is some variable D. Okay? And say that Z influences D. This means that D is a descendant of Z, and therefore is somehow related to X and Y, but X and Y are independent. So what we generally want to do is we want to list all the paths that we know are influencing our X and our Y. And we want to either close them by being able to control for them or by being able to randomize them in some way. And so those are some definitions for causal diagrams and understanding how things relate to each other. I'm not going to go super into it besides those basics, but I'm happy to talk more about it if it's something that's really interesting to you. But I think this is also just a good programming tool for you guys to think about prime theories in general and sort of how they describe their causes, right? So I came up with some for social disorganization. I know you guys like that theory. So we know that poverty, residential mobility, and ethnic heterogeneity all cause social disorganization, which therefore causes crime. And so the issue that develops from social disorganization is it's difficult to really quantify this larger theoretical framework. So something that was developed because of it was collective efficacy, which is this idea of whether or not people are willing to intervene in a specific situation in which their neighbors are committing crimes or doing delinquent acts, right? And so this was sort of easier to quantify than social disorganization because it was like sort of a measure of informal social control within neighborhoods. So this is also nice because I can copy this code. The code develops as you adjust to it. So what I did is I developed these models prior and I just am pasting the code into it. And what I did was I put one model multiple times. So you see, okay, there you go. That's much better, right? Okay, so we have crime over here, which is our outcome variable. And we get all these testable implications that we can actually statistically model. And so we have poverty, residential mobility, ethnic heterogeneity, which were in our original model. The collective efficacy allows us to conceptualize some like intermediary before social disorganization because it helps us quantify what that looks like, and theoretically it is a lack of informal social control, right? The theory is that neighborhoods that aren't socially disorganized have their own informal methods of control that sort of push people to act in specific ways, right? And so part of that metric of collective efficacy that people develop is this idea that there are few neighborhood social ties. So we could utilize a survey to understand individuals' social ties and like how many people they know in their neighborhood and how many friends they have in their neighborhood and such like that. Little organizational participation. So there could be this idea of how many group meetings they go to, if they've ever been to a community meeting or organize a community meeting, and then I did not mean to create a relationship there. And unwillingness to engage in social control. So whether or not you would be willing to intervene if you saw someone doing something that was not okay. And so poverty, residential mobility, and ethnic heterogeneity, which were sort of the precursors to developing this idea of collective efficacy, which I've labeled here as the exposure. These sort of precursors also influence these things, right? So this is why this specific program is helpful, because oftentimes criminal justice theories can get super complicated. So it's helpful to sort of map out exactly what you mean and what parts of the theory and what things you're quantifying. And so we know that poverty just influences crime in general. And then we know that poverty might also influence your ability to participate in local community group meetings. If you are working a lot and it's going to be more difficult for you to go to community meetings if you have 3 jobs and are trying to make ends meet, right? You're going to be pretty high stressed, and your emotional capacity to go to community meetings is going to be pretty low. That's my theoretical understanding of it. You could think of something else and how that would influence any of these. You might think that poverty influences this as well. So it's really about like mapping your own thoughts, but this is sort of just an example of something I came up with. It's not right or wrong, But the way that I determine whether or not it's right or wrong is on the right when I test these implications in statistical methods and control for the backdoor influences between the exposure variable and the outcome variable. So residential mobility might influence neighborhood social ties and organizational participation. So if you're moving a lot, then it's gonna be hard to feel settled and like you do know your neighbors. And then ethnic heterogeneity, which is there are like different cultures all living in the same area, I theorize would create an unwillingness for people to engage in social control because maybe there are language barriers, so you're not going to intervene in a particular situation because you don't really know what's going on. You don't have the language understanding to really determine if someone is in danger or if people are just at a lower level of aggression. It's sort of hard to understand that if you aren't speaking the same language. And so this is an example of how you can take theory and develop sort of like a causal model for it and really map out these things. So I'm not expecting you guys to work with anything regarding this in my class, but I do think if you're more into math or you are really into quantitative methods and causal mapping, this is a super helpful tool. I myself am just sort of grappling with it, but I thought that you might be interested in it. And I do think that it's a pretty cool way to just map out your thoughts in general too. Will also, if you need to do a causal diagram for a class, to use this as a resource too. Okay, that's my little tidbit on this resource, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.